Okay, so thanks everybody for joining and for being part of this program. My name is Jack McCullough. For those who don't know me, I am the founder and president of the CFO Leadership Council. And I know approximately 0 people are actually here to listen to me today, so I will get off stage as quickly as I can. I do want to go through a couple of brief things before we start. First of all, welcome and good afternoon, good morning, depending upon where you are. And thank you for being part of this. Before I introduce Joyce, just a couple of quick things I want to go through is, first of all, if you have any questions during this program, if you put them in the chat area, I will monitor them as best I can and get them over to Joyce. Additionally, she's leaving 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the presentation for questions. So you can save those for that if you prefer. Also, very excited, this program is actually eligible for CPE. And it turned out, I thought Joyce being a psychoanalyst may not know a whole lot about that, but she actually knows more about it than I did. She came with some great polling questions. So there will be 4 questions throughout the program. And if you wish to earn CPE, you will need to answer all 4 of the questions. However, even if you don't need CPE, it would be great if you can answer the questions anyway. Just they're interesting in nature, and at least I would love to see what the responses are. Also, this is the first in a 3-part series, each of them happening on the next 2 Thursdays. You do have to register separately for each session. Unfortunately, we weren't able to figure out a way that you could interview for one program on 3 different days. So if you, when you want to register for next week's program, the week after, you do have to do that independently. And finally, you're all doing it anyway, but I'm going to ask you to turn off your cameras and your microphones, just because we are recording this session and we do want it to focus on our speaker and the PowerPoint slide she's providing. So that said, I'm about to concede the floor. But first, I just want to say, how, I've gotten to know Joyce a lot over the last several months, and she's fantastic. And I think, we're very lucky to have her as a speaker today. This session today is largely on burnout and overwork, which, if you follow those things, it's actually, one of the biggest challenges facing executives today. And unfortunately, there's no real end in sight to that. It just seems like as an executive, we're going to be working a lot of hours in some pressure-packed environments. So we're going to have to find the tools to deal with that as best we can. So I think Joyce is going to be able to do that today. And I think I'll go on a limb and say this will be the most important webinar that we will have during the course of the year. So Joyce, thank you for being part of this. And
oh my goodness, thank you, Jack. Thank you so much. I'm honored and excited to be with you all today. And thank you so much for recognizing the importance of mental health. And this topic of overwork and burnout is especially important during these times. I have been a licensed psychotherapist practicing in the Chicago area for over 25 years. And I find my work to be emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually rewarding. I'm also a business professional. I'm an entrepreneur who built and worked as CEO for 13 years and successfully sold a national outpatient mental health company. So I do understand some of the pressures of working in the C-suite. And my hope and intention today is to inspire you and provide you with a ton of tips and tools and resources to help you take better care of yourself and recover from any burnout and prevent it going forward. I am super passionate about destigmatizing mental health issues and providing information, resources, and access to care. And I've been speaking for companies really around the globe as a keynote speaker and corporate trainer on topics like mental health awareness and preventing overwork and burnout. And I'm super excited that the CFO Leadership Council has set up this 3-part series, which is called The Psychology of Success. And it's really my 3 favorite presentations. Today, we're talking about overwork and burnout. Next time, we're talking about mindfulness practices, which I really believe are the best, most useful approach to stress reduction. And the last presentation, we're talking about mental wealth. As a therapist and entrepreneur, I've become extremely interested in the psychology of money. I recently wrote a book called The Financial Mindset Fix, and Jack and the CFO Leadership Council have been generous enough to send each of you a Kindle format of that book. So we will go ahead and get started with today's presentation. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. So hopefully you are seeing that here. And I do have copies of my slides and a whole bunch of resources for you that I'm putting in the chat. It is a landing page on my website. You do need to take a second to enter your name and your email address. But after you have that, you will have access to a web page that has copies of these slides so that you can share them with your teams. And we're also videoing this presentation. So if you have colleagues who missed it, they can access the information as well. And I share a lot of exercises that you can use in your workplaces. You can use them yourself or with your families. So be sure to check out that landing page. So today, our objectives are really to understand the mental health implications of the pandemic, because overwork and burnout have a strong interrelationship with our mental health. And I'm going to help you differentiate between stress and burnout, and also learn ways to improve your self-care practices and to access better support. The way that stress and mental health works is the higher our stressors, the more support and the more self-care that we need. And during the pandemic, we've had increased stressors and less time for self-care practices and less access to support, which leads to some mental health implications. And we're going to help you develop a plan. This is like free therapy for you to recover from burnout and to prevent it going forward. So the pandemic over the past couple of years, even longer now, is a global chronic trauma. So traumas, I think sometimes people think of trauma as something that only war veterans experience or victims of a horrible assault or something like that. But as human beings, we all experience trauma to some degree or other. And traumas are life experiences that our minds and bodies cannot process like usual life events. And they get locked in our psyches and in our bodies and have physical and mental health results. So even prior to the pandemic, our world was in a stress epidemic. This data is from the American Psychological Association, and you can see that 61% of individuals were reporting workplace stress. Some recent studies said 61% of us are experiencing chronic, regular, extreme workplace stress that's impacting our mental health and physical health. 77% of us have physiological symptoms of stress, 73% emotional or psychological symptoms. And I thought this was really interesting. Nearly half of us were reporting that our stress had increased over the past 5 years. And that was before the pandemic. So can you imagine the pandemic has added fuel to the fire and taken our mental health epidemic into a full-on mental health crisis? So I'd like us to take a moment to honor what we've been through over the past couple of years. You all are leaders, you're executives, you have demanding jobs, you have your own personal lives to manage, your friends, your families, your communities, your own health and wellness. And during the pandemic, we've had the additional stressors of serious concerns for our health and safety and the safety of our loved ones. As I've been polling participants in my workshops across industries, really across the globe, that is by far the first and foremost greatest stressor. And even now we have, COVID still around, we have monkeypox coming up, and many people are experiencing health anxiety. We have been in a constant state of transition and change, and we've been pivoting and having to work differently. And change and transition cause our minds and bodies overwhelm and stress. So we've been in this chronic state of pivoting for 2 years. We've had to adjust to working differently, and there have been blessings and challenges that have come with that. We've had less access to social support and community. Even now, we're able to travel and get together with our loved ones, but it may not be the same as we were able to do even before the pandemic. The research shows that our dependent care has been very much on the rise. So you may have younger children, you may have older children like I do. I have kids between the ages of 17 and 26. We're a blended family. The younger two are mine, the other two are my husband's. And so we have a lot of dependent care. Maybe you're caring for elderly parents or a pet. So that can make work-life balance extremely challenging, especially if you're working remotely or a hybrid job, or now you're being asked to go back into the office. There's increase in financial fears and stress with gas prices, the war in Ukraine, and other uncertainty. Businesses closing during the pandemic, some people dealing with unemployment or difficulty getting help. You may have hiring challenges in your organizations. And we've been living during a time where systemic racism and important racial injustice issues are coming to the forefront. And my hope is that this will lead to much needed change, but it is challenging and re-traumatizing for many individuals. So it's important to recognize that that's been an additional stressor. There's so much going on in the world. We're also living during a time of great political divide and unrest. So even within your own families, you may have individuals or in your partnerships that have very polarized political beliefs. And this leads to additional stress and relationship conflict and overall fear and anxiety about the state of the world. So there's just been massive amounts of challenges. And even as we're reintegrating, the client companies that I've been working with are really in industries ranging from CPAs and financial companies, fintech companies, to tech companies, healthcare, even fisheries was one of my interesting client companies, was the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. People are dealing with continued change as we're reintegrating back into the office. Continued health anxiety, a significant amount of social anxiety. So, some awkwardness about we've kind of been in our little cocoons at home, and now we're having in-person conferences and events and meetings and needing to brush off our social skills and get comfortable again. Still managing dependent care, and if you're going into the office, having to make plans for that. And financial stress of helping loved ones, especially for the sandwich generation folks that are helping their kids and also helping perhaps elderly parents. The research is showing that workload has actually increased during the pandemic. So you're not alone. And if you're working remote or hybrid, the statistics are you're working an average of 4 hours a week or more than you would have previously. So I'd like to go ahead and launch the first poll, and I want to hear from you. What have been some of your primary stressors during the pandemic? And again, these polls are anonymous, so you can answer honestly, and they are multiple choice, so select as many as are relevant to you. I think sometimes it's really normalizing to see that we're not alone and that others are doing well. Also dealing with challenges, because sometimes we compare our insides to other people's outsides, and we imagine that we're struggling to manage it all, but that everyone else is doing great. So I appreciate you taking time to complete this poll. We'll give it a couple more seconds here, and then I'll go ahead and share the results. Wonderful. It looks like we're slowing down there. So far, it looks like challenges with work-life balance is really high up there, much higher so than in other industries in which I've launched this poll. So you all, I'm imagining, have very high work hours and also additional responsibilities at home. So most of you, over 90%, have participated. So I'm going to go ahead and share the results. So you can see here that concern for health and safety of ourselves and others is right up there, with almost 60% of you concerned about that. Work-life balance taking the lead, difficulty managing uncertainty and change also being a significant challenge. And the financial stress and social isolation are also on there. So if you are one of the people that indicated financial stress, I really encourage you to sign up for part 3 of this workshop series. And the mindfulness session, that's part 2, will help you manage all of these stressors. So thank you so much for participating in that poll. My little poll thing is kind of doing some funky stuff and still showing up for me. So I'm just going to take a second and move that. Okay, so we are all different and we all respond to stress in our own unique way. Some of us are hardwired to respond to stress physically. So maybe you're a person who gets headaches or migraines, or you forget to eat, or you're suddenly eating too much, or you're having difficulty sleeping. As in my practice, hearing about insomnia has been extremely common during the pandemic. Those are physical signs of stress. Emotional signs of stress could be irritability or apathy, just feeling kind of blah and numb. You could feel less patient and more easily frustrated, more easily angered. Those are emotional signs of stress. You don't have to have had COVID like I did. I had it during November of 2020, and I definitely had the brain fog. I think we all have brain fog as a result of the pandemic. We are on cognitive overload with the news bombarding us, so many different challenges and changes. It's like a computer operating system that has too many screens open. We are experiencing mental glitches and shutdown. So if you're having memory problems, difficulty making decisions, some forgetfulness, or you're making mistakes or errors at work, these are signs of stress. These are mental health symptoms. And so you want to be mindful and start to recognize these. And again, the strategies that I'm going to be teaching in these 3 different sessions are going to help you learn some tools and techniques to manage the stress in a way so that you don't experience these symptoms to the degree that you may be experiencing them now. Relational stress. When we are under stress, our coping skills go down. So our bandwidth. So if you are having conflict with your partner, with your kids, with your loved ones, with your coworkers and teams, you are not alone. So sometimes it comes out that way. And sometimes when we're stressed, it impacts our finances. We might have some compulsive spending. So hopefully I'm not the only one who has some Amazon packages arriving and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's this? I don't even remember what I bought. I think a lot of us are maybe having a glass of wine and trying to decompress and maybe impulse buying and that type of thing. So stress can definitely also impact our finances. There is a difference between stress and burnout. So stress, we know, is anything that our mind or body experiences as overwhelming, whereas burnout is a prolonged and chronic state of stress. I would venture to say that each and every one of us is really a candidate for burnout at this point. If you're not feeling burned out in some aspect of your life, you're doing something really well, because I think it's extremely normal to be experiencing some fatigue, some lack of energy, just some frustration or feeling kind of disheartened. These are common symptoms of burnout. And we don't just experience burnout at work. Like I mentioned, I have 4 kids, and it seems like they rotate which one of them is high need or maybe in crisis. And my husband and I were saying we feel like we have parent burnout from time to time. So just being mindful of how you're doing. So these are some symptoms of burnout. And I want you to look at them and to be honest with yourself. Look at this slide and ask yourself, do I identify any of these signs and symptoms within myself, within my executive team, within my team that I lead, or my loved ones? And part of this training is really mental health awareness and encouraging you to recognize these symptoms in yourself and to use the information and techniques that we're teaching, but also consider getting professional support and help, and to suggest that to others. Of course, I'm a therapist and I'm biased, but I think we all can benefit from therapy or counseling at different points in our lives. I think of it like going to a personal trainer for your mind or your relationship, and that there's no shame or stigma. It doesn't mean that you're crazy or in crisis. When I was in graduate school at Northwestern University in the mid-90s, I was really afraid that my professors were going to see that I personally deal with an anxiety disorder, and that they'd say, you can't be a therapist, you've got your own issues. But thankfully, they recognize we all have mental health, just like we have physical health. None of us is perfect. We are all hardwired to respond to stress differently, whether it's with some depressive symptoms, anxieties, some substance use or addictive tendencies. And our stressors can exacerbate those. So having mental health challenges is a normal response to our nature and nurture, and help is available and effective. When we think about burnout, I'd like you to think right now, if you were a cell phone, what would your battery charge be at right now? So it's probably midday wherever you are in the country, or I heard we had some international attendees. So where's your battery charge at? And if you're comfortable, put it in the chat. Again, no judgment, no shame. Are you at 80% or higher? Are you somewhere in the middle? Or are you on low power mode? Are you struggling a little bit? And I encourage you to check in with your internal battery charge throughout the day. We aren't like cell phones. We don't get the red alert when we are on low power. So we need to check in with ourselves and start to recognize the activities that either refuel our cup or drain our cup. I have a 17-year-old daughter. She's adorable, but wow, I notice when she gets in the car and starts talking to me about her day, I can start at maybe 80%, just feel my battery draining while talking with her. So then I need to follow that up with some self-care practices. Oh my gosh, I love this. Carolyn said 75% don't tell Jack. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. You're doing well. 75% is awesome. There are some of you that are 30 or under. And so that is definitely a warning sign. Just like with a cell phone, when you're at about 35%, you'd start to plug it in. And that's what I want you to start to teach yourself, that when you're getting low on your energy levels, that you start to use some of these practices to refuel yourself. This is very serious. According to the World Health Organization, 785,000 deaths happen per year due to overwork and burnout. I was interviewed by NPR on this topic. I wrote a blog on it for Psychology Today. It is a very serious issue that is very common right now. The research shows that overwork and burnout lead to increased risk for stroke, heart disease, obviously anxiety and depression, and other mental and physical health conditions. So what is happening in our country is that all of this burnout and the changes of the pandemic have triggered the Great Resignation. And you may have seeing that in your own organization. And this is a real workforce concern. Many people are moving to self-employment because they're reevaluating their priorities and their work-life balance. And I'm sure that you and your teams want your organizations to stay healthy and strong. So in my Psychology Today article, which is on one of the links on the landing page, I have suggestions for organizations on how to help employees recover from burnout. So what are the mental health implications of all of this stress and burnout that people are experiencing? So during the pandemic, it's important to honor that each of us has experienced grief and loss to some degree or other. Some of us have lost loved ones to COVID. My heart goes out to two of my friends and colleagues who are from South Asia, and they have each lost multiple family members due to the virus overseas. Some have lost loved ones to the virus or during the pandemic and weren't able to properly grieve. We may, each of us, be grieving life events that we weren't able to have, or just life as usual. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, there's a massive increase in stress. 65% of Americans are reporting symptoms of anxiety. Anxiety symptoms include nervousness, muscle tension, feelings of panic, even panic attacks or overwhelm. They also include ruminating thoughts about the past. And depression. 45% of Americans are reporting symptoms of depression. I think it's really important to note that many lay people think of depression as extreme sadness and maybe having suicidal thoughts and feelings. And it's far more common for people to have depression, a lower grade depression, which is called dysthymia or pervasive mood disorder. And that just means that you have kind of lower self-esteem, you're kind of in a funk, you're maybe feeling a little apathetic, not finding joy in life in the ways that you usually are. And for a lot of individuals, depression manifests as irritability or anger. So if you have a loved one, or even you recognize that within yourself, that you are angry and agitated, that actually could be depression. And it's important to get that looked at. Talk to your doctor, talk to a therapist, and get help, because help is available and effective. There's been an enormous increase in alcohol use and substance use. When we're stressed, oftentimes people self-medicate, and it's like a chicken and egg situation where when we're drinking or we're using drugs, that can make us feel much worse physically and mentally. It can have serious implications on our work performance. And if we are, also if we're dealing with mental health situations, we might be more drawn to self-medication, like I said. The research is showing an increase in divorce, domestic violence, and even child abuse. I mentioned trauma. So if you have been a frontline worker or you have frontline workers on your team, they are 75% more likely to be experiencing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. People who've had COVID are 50% more likely to be experiencing PTSD. PTSD is very common at this time, and it leads to symptoms such as nightmares, startle response, muscle tension, maybe ruminating thoughts or even flashbacks about old traumas that you thought you'd kind of worked through. Suddenly they're popping up again. That's a very common symptom during the pandemic. Suicide rates have been at a 30-year all-time high, and they've even increased during the pandemic. And clinical burnout, which actually is a mental health diagnosis, has become extremely common. So this slide.
Joyce, can I interrupt you? We do have a couple of questions.
Yes, please.
Okay. The first is a two-part question. So are there any particular foods that one might avoid, or foods that one should embrace to reduce stress? And then also techniques to improve sleep. Hey, that's not a two-part question, that's two questions. but they snuck that one in there.
Yes,
But
I am certainly not an expert in that, but oh my gosh, I'm spacing on his name, but this author wrote Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. And he is fantastic. I feel like his name is Drew, and I'm spacing on it. But I've done some podcasts with him. He's brilliant. He's actually a psychiatrist who became very interested in food. And basically, the Mediterranean diet is really supposed to be very helpful for decreasing stress. And of course, processed foods, sugars, lots of caffeine, that is not good for our mental health.
okay. And then do I have time for one more?
Yes.
Okay, we have 4 or 5. And the other one is you indicated you had brain fog in
Yes.
November of 2020. And was just curious how you handled it.
It was very challenging. I think sometimes just being honest with people. And actually, I presented for the CFO women's group within your organization. And I remember one of the leaders herself said, "Hey, I just want to let you know I'm recovering from COVID and I'm just not quite myself right now." And I thought that was a great example of just being assertive, putting it out there, being transparent, and it helped everybody understand, like, okay, her brain's not working to the best of ability. She was still brilliant and amazing. But I think just, letting people know, cutting yourself some slack, and a lot of the skills that I'll share both today and especially in the next presentation on mindfulness will help you really recover from those challenges.
Okay, great.
All right, well, we have a bunch of content. Oh, go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I was going to say somebody offered up that it was Drew Ramsey, Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. Does that sound right?
That sounds exactly right. I confuse him and Dave Ramsey, the financial person, and I knew that their names were similar, and I just couldn't differentiate. So I appreciate the help. He is fantastic.
Sounds good. And Caroline thanks you for ruining her cover with me, I guess. So
oh, I'm sorry.
oh, cool. Anyway,
as a therapist, I should respect confidentiality.
There you go. There are a few more, but how about I go back on mute, and while the poll's going, I can ask you then?
Yes, that sounds great. So this is a mental health continuum, and I love this infographic because I think a lot of times we think about mental health as being mental illness, and really there's a continuum between being in crisis and excelling. And I want you to look at this and be honest with yourself about where you fall today within this continuum. 6 months ago, during my webinars, most people were indicating that they were either struggling or surviving. Now I'm seeing kind of a bell curve with, people still surviving in the middle, but a few more thriving. So if you are in crisis, struggling, or surviving, I definitely encourage you to talk to someone. Again, I think we all can benefit from therapy. I've been in therapy at various points in my life. I've found it enormously helpful, personally and professionally. So now we're moving into some of the strategies to help you recover from burnout and promote positive mental health. I love this quote from Maya Angelou. She said, "If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude." So really, to me, that speaks to kind of the wisdom of the serenity prayer. I don't mean that in a religious way, but more of a philosophy. And that's the idea that, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So really, all we can each control is our own thoughts, our own emotions, and yes, we can control them. That's a skill that we can practice and develop, especially with the mindfulness strategies you'll learn in part 2, your own behaviors and your own choices. We have so much that's outside of our control. And as a therapist, I've had a lot of people sit on my couch and talk about other people, their bosses, their partners. And we really want to kind of surrender what we can't control and focus on what we can so that we aren't spinning our wheels and we are moving forward. I mentioned the higher our stressors, the more self-care and the more support we need. So if you're overworking, I really want you to shift your mindset back into creating a healthy, structured routine for yourself. So scheduling in your sleep schedule, setting alerts for when to get ready for bed, scheduling in your workouts and treating that like a meeting that absolutely cannot be canceled. Taking time, I think I'm happy that I have these webinars sometimes to pull myself together, because working remotely, it's very easy to just kind of be schleppy and casual, and that can actually kind of impair our self-esteem. So making sure that we're taking time to take care of ourselves. If you are going back into the office, giving yourself a lot of time for that commute so that you're not creating stress by being pressed for time, and that you're planning some self-care, maybe listening to podcasts or good music, or if you're on the train, reading a book, really taking the time to plan healthy meals so that you're not just always on the go and grabbing what's quick and easy, because that tends to be what's least healthy for us. And managing your dependent care. I think having a village of people to help you care for the people that you take care of is super important. And even having self-care practices at work. So I have a million tools in my toolbox. I have, during the workday, I have mindfulness apps where I'll take a 5-minute break for a meditation. I might take a 10-minute break to do some stretching. I might take a 30-minute walk at lunch. Even having things that make you feel good, whether it's healthy snacks, your water bottle, having whatever it is, essential oils or hand lotions or anything that you need so that you feel comfortable at work. Maybe it's your gym clothes so that you're more likely to work out afterwards. Since we are all way too busy, it's important to eliminate time wasters. I realized that Words with Friends was taking up about 3 hours of my week. So I decided to delete the app and use that time doing things that are more healthy for me, like exercise. Be aware of high investment, low priority tasks. So if you're stressed out at work, this may not be the time to redecorate your home. You want to just kind of simplify things and say no and only do what is top priority, both at home and at work. We'll talk about this more in part 2, but being a single tasker and chunking your related tasks really reduces stress and overwhelm rather than constantly shifting gears. Taking breaks to replenish your energy is really important, and using your calendar to block off time that you're working on projects so that you're not interrupted, taking advantage of your auto response on your emails so that you can have uninterrupted time. And at the end of each day, taking a moment to clear your desk, clear your desktop, organize your to-do list for the next day is going to set you up for success. So making sure that you are prioritizing, you're delegating, you're simplifying, you're setting those time limits. And that's really an aspect of self-care. So having healthy boundaries with work, with your family, with your friends, postponing anything that isn't imminent when you're especially busy, just getting those off of your plate. So in sum, I want you to prioritize your own mental health and well-being, create structure to your day, take a break from the news. I suggest listening to it in the morning and the afternoon after work, but not too close to bed, and certainly not all day long because it's overwhelming. So mindfulness practices that we'll talk about a whole bunch next time, and I want you to see from this slide why it's so important. Mindfulness has been supported in the research to improve everything on the left of this slide and decrease everything on the right. It's a phenomenally helpful practice that can help you personally and professionally. In therapy land, cognitive behavioral therapy asserts that our thoughts precede our emotions and behaviors. So if we have catastrophic or critical thinking, we all have that inner critic in our head, that voice that tells us we're not good enough and has negative thinking. I've named mine Zelda. She's a total pain. You might consider naming your inner saboteur or critic so you can develop more mindful awareness of how it causes you stress and overwhelm. And learning to detach from that, to detach from fear, to recognize catastrophic thinking, and really practice some positive mantras or statements to kind of get you through the moment. When I'm overwhelmed, I say to myself, I'm a human being, I'm doing the best that I can do, and that's all I can do. So we want to practice gratitude. Gratitude is the easiest way to shift from negative thinking to positive thinking. So keeping a gratitude journal. Mentally, if you're in a meeting, as a CEO, I would ask my leadership team, I'd like us to start this meeting, or particularly at the end of a tough meeting, I might say, let's each state 3 things that we're grateful for within this organization. Kind of shifts the focus from the negative to the positive. Detachment is a mindfulness strategy that really involves learning how to separate ourselves from our own negative emotions so that we can respond to them rather than react unconsciously. We can respond thoughtfully. It's just developing a little healthy separation between our emotions and our responses. We can also use healthy detachment to separate from the negativity of others. I was once at Target and the cashier had a customer in front of me who was super rude to her. She was in fact even swearing at him. And he remained completely calm and cool and collected. And after she left, I said, I'm sorry she was so rude to you. And like, you were amazing. How did you do that? And he said, oh, I don't let anyone in my head who isn't paying rent. Like, isn't that brilliant? That's detachment. And that's a skill that we can all learn and develop. So again, we want to prioritize our well-being. Many of you are probably caretakers for others, including maybe your CEOs, but you have to take care of yourself first or you have nothing to give. So setting healthy limits and boundaries, learning how to say no, using that assertive communication where you demonstrate respect for yourself and others, and you set limits and boundaries.
Joyce, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but I promised you that I would watch the clock for you. We have about 15 minutes left.
Yes, thank you so much, Jack. And all your polls are coming up. They're all going to be kind of smushed together here toward the end, and I will leave a couple moments for questions. So self-compassion is another really important aspect of reducing stress and burnout and overwhelm. So this is really about shifting your relationship with yourself from being very hard on yourself to being more compassionate and accepting. This is one of my favorite tools. It is one of the exercises from my book. It is downloadable on the landing page that I shared with you, and you'll also see it in the Kindle version of your book. This is a tool where each spoke is a different aspect of self-care. The way that it works is that you put a dot on each spoke according to how well you're doing. I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll while we do this. So if you are doing well in a certain area, like you're doing well at getting enough sleep, you'd put a dot toward the outside of the wheel. If you're not doing super great in an area, like you're not doing well with self-forgiveness or hydration or unplugging from technology, you'd put a dot toward the middle of the wheel. When you're done with all the spokes, you connect the dots and you identify your dents in the wheel. I recommend that you share this with your teams and that you create some accountability for how you all are going to improve your self-care. So I'll go ahead and share the results in a second. It looks like most of you are completing that. Support, I mentioned, is also a way that we need to refuel ourselves. If you look at this slide, you will see some of the barriers to receiving support, and maybe you recognize some within yourself. Maybe you feel like it takes too much time. Maybe it's an aspect of ego. You feel like asking for help is a sign of weakness. Maybe you have difficulty trusting. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share these results. Awesome job on this poll. It looks like there's lots of areas of improvement that you all are going to be working on. I love seeing that really in every category. So I really hope that you'll create some accountability and commit to yourself to working on your self-care. So this is a slide of me doing yoga. This is a pose called camel pose. And yoga is a mindfulness practice. And this pose is a heart-opening pose that this whole process of mindfulness and yoga and that type of practice really helped me open up to receiving. I had been very burnt out as a CEO and a mom of kids and needed to learn how to better access support. So if you're not great about it, you're not alone. This is another wheel exercise where you can write the names of each person who provides you with the various types of support, and you can assess your levels of support in each area. So I'm going to launch a poll now, and I'd like to hear from you. Which types of support could you use more of? Is it community support, spiritual support, logistical support with acts of daily living? Is it, more support from your partner? As I've been giving these presentations, 95% of attendees indicated that they needed more emotional support. So what does that say about our culture? We all need to get better about asking for it. So make sure you're not isolating, you're connecting with loved ones, you're creating and accessing your community. And again, consider therapy or counseling. Some people ask me, when do I know that it's time to go? I think you can go for a wellness checkup. We can all benefit from therapy at different points in our lives. And if you're busy, therapists work over telehealth now. So people log in from their home offices, their work offices, from their cars, even a park bench. So thank you for participating in this poll. I'm going to go ahead and share the results. And again, most of you needing more emotional support. So some of your homework is going to be identifying who in your support network is capable of providing it and being specific about what you need. So asking them, hey, I just need you to listen to me for 20 minutes. Or, hey, I'd love it if you would check in with me once a day. I'm kind of going through a hard time. Whatever it might be, being specific and asking for what you need from your support network. This is a work satisfaction wheel. We're going to talk about this one more in the mental wealth training, which is the third part. This is a really good wheel exercise to help you identify areas of needed improvement in your work satisfaction. It can help you work on your work-life balance, and it's also a good starting spot for negotiating for some improvements in your work situation. So basically, all that we have shared today are skills that are going to help you be more resilient, to bounce back from challenges and to persevere and succeed personally and professionally. Again, we're living during a time of constant change and transition. So I'd like to share the wisdom of Lao Tzu, an ancient Chinese philosopher. He said, if you realize that all things change, there's nothing you'll need to hold on to. So shifting your mindset from kind of a rigidity, liking things the way they were, to being more adaptive and flexible. It's kind of like how high rises were meant to sway in the wind. They are built that way. So these are some characteristics of resilient people. You might identify some of them within yourself, or maybe they're growth edges for you that you'd like to continue to work on. My book that you should each have has tons of practical exercises, tools, and tips for helping you build resilience. And all of the things that we learned today will help you be more resilient. So why am I showing you a picture of a woman with pink hair doing yoga? When I was at my local yoga studio, a military officer came in and he said, you know, we do yoga in the military, but they don't call it yoga. And we said, what do they call it? And he said, resilience training. And I really related to that because I realized that when you're in an uncomfortable or challenging pose, you realize that you can connect the breath and that the moment will pass. And in the end, you'll be stronger, more balanced, and more resilient and more flexible. So this pose, some of you may be yogis and recognize it as crow pose. For many years, I said it was too difficult and I didn't even try it. I would lay on my mat. And then it occurred to me, am I setting my own ceilings with self-limiting beliefs? Is that my inner critics, Zelda, telling me I can't do that? So I did it one arm at a time, and then I leaned forward and I faked it, and then I face planted 100 times. And then I finally did it. That's me, I did it. Now that picture was taken super quickly, but I did it. And that's what resilience is. And all of these skills that we learned are going to help you have more resilience and improve your mental health as well as your work performance. Now is the time to enter any questions that you might have. I'm sharing with you some reminders to use your benefits so that you don't get burnout. Most employers offer an EAP benefit, which is free and confidential to employees and immediate family members to help with mental health and really any other personal challenge. I also have a bunch of free resources for you here. If you have loved ones or people in your community who do not have insurance or mental health benefits, these are some self-assessment tools. If you're just curious, if you're dealing with ADD or depression, you can, click on these links for Psychology Today and Psych Central. And of course, it doesn't replace seeing a therapist, but is super helpful. I hope you'll give meditation a try. Those are some links to some meditations that I recommend. These are some mental health organizations you can follow if you'd like more information like today. And I'm excited that you'll be reading my book. I want to hear what you think. And lastly, we're going to launch the final poll. I want to hear from you. What is the outcome of today's session? What are you going to do differently? Are you going to practice better self-care? Are you going to access more support? Whatever it might be, I am interested in hearing that. Hopefully it's a lot. And I also want to share with you my contact information. If there's a question you wanted to ask me and you didn't get a chance, or you want to do so privately, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I could definitely use Instagram love, and feel free to email me as well. Great. It looks like a lot of you have completed the poll. And I love seeing that nearly half of you are going to improve your self-care practices, a third of you mindfulness, 11% more support, a few of you going to contact the EAP, and a few of you going to work my program. So that's awesome. So I'll bring it back to Jack. If there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer those in these next few minutes.
There are several, and you're getting a virtual standing ovation in the chat room. So
how nice.
And thank you so much for taking the time and sharing the wisdom for it. One question that I'll address quickly, just because it was asked of me. I did send a Kindle copy to everybody who registered. The last time I did it was Sunday. So if you registered in the last few days, you wouldn't have gotten it, but a few people have indicated they didn't get it. I'll look into it and just have it resent to you again. It might be in your spam folder. It was an email that looks like it came from me, but it came through Amazon. So I'm not sure. I know most people have actually downloaded it, but I highly recommend the book. It's one of the better reads I've done this year. So, but you have time for a few questions?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, great. So the first one, and in the context, most of the people on this call are leaders of their organizations, a lot of CFOs. And so one of the questions was, as a leader, what can I do to create a culture and an environment to, minimize the risks of this sort of things that we've been talking about with burnout and stress and, in a few cases, even worse.
Yes, absolutely. So one of my most popular presentations is called Mental Health First Aid for Leaders and Supervisors. And basically, I go through how to triage, how to identify mental health symptoms. I did share in your landing page the mental health resources for workplaces. So there's a lot of resources there. I also shared common signs and symptoms of mental health conditions so that you can begin to have those on your radar. But basically, mental health first aid is learning how to have those compassionate conversations and how to be the bridge to help employees get the care that they need and deserve, and that's available to them, and how to promote psychological safety in the workplace so that your team feels comfortable coming to you and saying, hey, like, I think I'm dealing with postpartum depression and I'm not doing super well. So that that you're not just like, what's going on with my team member? So that's a great question. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, another one is recommendations on conversations with your boss about burnout and overwork. And I'll have an immediate question from the same person right after this. So.
Yes, I mean, I think, it's a sensitive diplomatic conversation, but I think, approaching it from a win-win approach, like maybe providing some empathy to your boss and saying, I know you have deadlines, I'm sure you have expectations coming from the top, but I do want to share that, I attended this presentation, many people are dealing with burnout. I think I'm dealing with burnout. I'd like to have a conversation with you about how maybe we can work together so that I can recover and succeed in the workplace, and maybe having a presentation for the workplace would be helpful, or, can we have some conversations about my schedule or my workload? I love my job and I want to do well. And you don't have to overshare. You don't have to share deeply personal things. You can just share that maybe you have some challenges at home. You don't have to get into the nitty-gritty if you aren't comfortable. And human resources should always be a place that you can go for advocacy as well.
Cool. And a little advice going the other direction too. And because I had a thing, it was very meaningful to me. If you think your boss might be suffering from this, it's okay to tell him or her. In fact, like right at the start of COVID, I got an email from someone on the team. It came at 1 o'clock in the morning. But they'd actually sent it, at like 5 p.m., just scheduled it for 1 o'clock. And I responded immediately. And they came back like, what are you doing at 1 o'clock in the morning? And, your boss is not immortal. So, make sure that they're doing good practices too. But the related question to that from the same person is there are certain industries, investment banking, working at law firms, maybe public accounting, and some others, I'm sure, where it's just kind of difficult. You can't delegate, and, it's not really an alternative. You're just sort of expected to do the work. And do you have any reaction to that? They pay really well, so it's difficult to walk away from an investment banker's salary when you've gotten used to the lifestyle, right?
Definitely. Industries like law. I've worked with mortgage companies where the brokers are working 80 hours a week, the examples that you mentioned. And so it's really about, just doing your best and getting better about setting those limits and boundaries, that you're a human being, your mental health and physical health are paramount, and, doing the work that you can and in the amount of time that is healthy for you, and getting more comfortable at maybe going to your boss and saying, like, just want to let you know, like, I'm working super hard, but I may not meet this deadline, and being proactive about it, and asking are there any resources available for any admin help, or can we take something else off of my plate? But what I have found by and large is that the people who work out every day are the people who are able to handle a big job and multiple responsibilities the best. So perhaps prioritizing that. I've even heard some research that exercising is even more important than sleep, which I was very surprised about. but it can help with mental clarity and physical health pretty amazingly if you've got a job where you're working a ton of hours.
Oh, bummer. That actually was my excuse to not exercise, that sleep is more important. You've taken that away from me.
I know.
So, anyway, there was a question. It's not really one, there's not a right answer, but it's more kind of what would your reaction to it be? And it was an interesting point. You quoted 785,000 deaths due to burnout. And so the question is, why do you think corporate America or investment bankers, whatever, why aren't they addressing it? That as an employee, we're the most important resource. And, 785,000 is an awful lot of people to lose because of burnout.
Yeah, I mean, my hope, and I am an optimist, my hope is that the pandemic and the Great Resignation and the mental health crisis have forced organizations to recognize the implications of overwork and burnout. I have my mental health speaking business has been through the roof over the last couple of years. I'm seeing a lot more wellness benefits being offered, including subscriptions to Headspace and apps like Ginger that offer 24/7 therapy, increased EAP benefits, increased trainings for staff. So I do hope that it gets better. And I think it's important for each of us to have a voice and to speak up. And maybe you could start a committee within your organization about how to help the organization have more realistic expectations and standards and more of a culture of wellness.
Okay, that's good. I believe that's all of the questions that we have, and we've gone a little bit over, so I do thank you for indulging us. But, this was wonderful. Again, I put at the very end the link to the presentation, and I was asked, why do I keep sending it? Because what happens is when people join, they only see the chat from the point they join on. So they don't see it. I think I shared it like 4 or 5 times. And, if you join between the 3rd and the 4th, you didn't see the first 3. But Joyce, this was wonderful. I look forward to session 2, which will be a week from now. Where will you be next week at this time?
I will be at my home in Evanston, near Chicago. Today I'm in Denver. So
Nice.
moving about.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was just terrific, as evidenced by all the positive feedback in the chat area. And, to those of you who are on the call, I hope you found this useful. In fact, I know that you did. And, if you have friends who, could benefit by being part of the CFO Leadership Council, because we do have a lot of things that are on the so-called soft side of business. And I don't mean that patronizingly, but, let them know about the group. So, and with that, I am going to end things. Joyce, any final words?
Nope, other than thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a good rest of the day.